You know, Lindsay, I really appreciated your remarks this morning. We do need prayer in our country every day, not just on celebration days or remembrance days, but every day. We haven't gotten everything right, but we've got a lot of things right. We need to be in prayer for God that we can get those corrected. Looks like this morning we have 72, last week 59, and a year ago 61. It's nice to see those numbers come up. Do we have any birthdays, anniversaries this week to celebrate that anybody wants to contribute to the birthday bank? No one? Must have been a lonely week. All right. How about announcements? Do we have anyone who has any announcements out there this morning? Yes, Lindsay.
We are going to have a church wedding shower for Morgan and Joey Hepler. They're getting married later on in October. Our wedding shower here at the church is going to be October 9th at 2 o'clock. That's a Sunday. So Sunday, October 9th at 2 o'clock. Plan to be here for the wedding shower for Morgan and Joey. We want to shower them with love from the church and with some gifts. So October 9th, put that on your calendar.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, just a moment. What? I'm going to take care of that. I'm just checking with folks out here first. Thank you. Okay. If there's no other announcements, if you look in your bulletins, there are several this morning. There's one that's not there that I want to bring up first. Next Sunday's service will be a community service held at the community building at 10 o'clock. There will be no services here. So 10 o'clock for community service at the community building. If you'll notice there, the Winnigan Fair, carry-in lunch that follows. You know, those are always good. If you like to eat, come to that part. That's good. If you like to hear the Word of God, come to the community service because it's usually even better. All right, the youth group meets tonight here at Winnigan at the church. Is that right? Okay. And nursery today is Pam Reed. Okay. Kids Church, Debbie York. And Bible study. We normally have Bible studies on Wednesday nights at the feed store. This is open to men and women. It will continue to be Wednesday night for this week, but after the fair, we're going to Thursday nights at 8 o'clock. So if you care to join us, we'd be glad to have you. Be sure and keep in mind prayers for Jim Jameson. Jim undergoes surgery tomorrow in Columbia for his cancer surgery. Just pray for him and Carol for strength and guidance for the doctors. There's a lot there going on. And for Rodney Wright and Joanne, who both are now in St. Joe at the hospital there. Rodney's having procedures done today, and they're trying to figure out what's going on there for him. So keep them in prayer. The Mendendro and the little children who lost their mother, keep them in prayer. Heidi Belzer, who's now in hospice care, and then Bruce Cumpracker, who's dealing with health issues. And there are some cards going around this morning. There's one card for Jim and Carol Jameson for his surgery that will be sent to him to receive at the hospital. Rodney and Joanne Wright, also a thinking of you card, along with Heidi Belzer and Randy. Of course, as I said, Heidi's in hospice. We have a get well card going around for Janine Fox for illness. She's just not feeling well today. And we have another get well card going around for Moberly Bob. That's how he's kind of known in the community. He's having back surgery. He's the guy that sets up a lot of the steam engine displays at the fair. I'll check one more time. Are there any other announcements? If not, Mike, you're up.
Well, good morning. How many of you wish you were still little like that? You know, I thought Mahomes was bigger. I love that little guy. Well, welcome to our services today. We have been talking a little bit about the people that Jesus encountered in his ministry. And is that on? Okay. One of the things that I have thought about throughout my life is the fact that we look at the Bible, we look at all the great people that we read about, Moses and Abraham and all these people. In the New Testament, of course, you know, there's Paul and Peter and Stephen and all these. And we look at ourselves and we think to ourselves, you know, these were great people. And I'm sure God was very pleased with them and used them, but they're not me. They're not me. Most of us don't think that we are all that valuable. And we crave significance. Every one of us want to be important. Every one of us want to be loved and appreciated. And we often think that, it's kind of like we live in a bubble. We live in a bubble and we're looking out from this bubble at everybody else. And we see all the beautiful people. We see all those people that are gorgeous, and so on you ladies, probably from the time you were little girls, probably saw those glamour magazines, and you looked at those and looked at those beautiful ladies and all the beautiful clothes they were wearing, and then you go to the mirror, you look at yourself, you say, that's not me. That's not me. By the way, that's not them either. Have you ever heard of airbrushing and computer things? How computers can take pounds off of you? That's why I walk around with a computer all the time. But really, you know, we look in the mirror and they say, that's not me. In fact, a lot of us don't even like to look at ourselves in pictures because we really don't think we're all that great and we don't really want to see ourselves. And what would God do with my life? How does God even really love me? And these are thoughts that if we were going to be honest, we're going to think about, because these are things that come to us throughout our lives. Well, we look at the rich people. They have value. They can buy things, but not me. I'm poor. I struggle. I can't have things that I want. I'm just one of those people that God probably doesn't look at. You know, you might think these things in your mind, and then there's the healthy people, and there's the educated people, and all anon we could go. And you know, our society actually, we value and we almost worship celebrities. We worship the entertainers. We worship sports heroes. We worship these people. And then we look at ourselves and think, I wished I was something better than I am. I wished I had more. The valuable people. We even compare ourselves with other people in the church at times. We ask ourselves and say, I wished I was more spiritual. I wish I was like that guy or that lady that just seems like they always have their act together. They're probably walking really, really close with God. And yet, I know that I struggle. And you look at yourself and you say, I wish I could be more gifted maybe. You know, I wish I was a better teacher. Or maybe, you know, I wished I could preach like the guy on TV, you know. I'll just tell you something about myself. I'm just being honest with you. I don't like to watch myself preach. I don't like to hear myself. I don't like my own voice. I think it sounds kind of weird. And when I watch myself preach, I think, you know, when I did that originally, I think it was better than this. But we always think there's somebody better, somebody God can use in a greater way than what we are used and who we are. I've even heard preachers talk about this, and you know, there are people that God used in the Bible that we look at and say, you know what, man, God could use these people, but it's not me. It's not me. How many of you realized that the great apostle Paul, considered himself to have a handicap? In fact, the Bible says that Paul he said that 3 different times he asked God to take away the thorn in the flesh that he had. He said, I could be a lot better servant, God, if you just take this away from me. And of course, we don't know what that thorn in the flesh really was because the Bible doesn't tell us. But I read one time a guy said that it possibly could be his eyesight. And then they postulated the fact that when Paul saw Jesus on the road to Damascus, that he was struck blind And he couldn't see for 3 days. You remember that story? And that possibly Paul didn't ever really completely get his eyesight back completely, or maybe his eyes looked funny. But whatever that was, Paul looked at that as a hindrance to him. And God said to him, he said, actually, I gave this to you so that I could use you, Paul, because if you didn't have this problem with all the other things that you are gifted in, you would have a problem to be too proud. And I cannot use a proud man. And then, Moses felt like he had a handicap too. When Moses was young, we look in the book of Acts, the 7th chapter, where Stephen talks and prays or preaches that message that got him stoned. That he talked about Moses, that when Moses was younger, that he was mighty in speech and in action. So he must have been a physical man, and he evidently was a powerful speaker. But 40 years later, when he was 80 years old, he said, God, I can't talk. I can't speak. I have a problem here. I cannot speak. And you are asking me to go to Pharaoh, not only to Pharaoh, to my people, and talk him into the fact that God spoke to me. I can just see him thinking about this and thinking, what am I going to tell him? You heard who? I heard God. What's his name? So he said, God, what am I going to tell him? Your name is, I am. I am who I am. You tell them, I am. Okay, then how did you hear him? This bush talked to me. Okay. All right. Are you on your meds, Moses? What's the deal here? You know how he was feeling. He felt like he had a handicap in speaking at that time in his life, and it was a mental thing. He couldn't speak. And God said to him, Moses, who made your mouth? Who made your mouth? And God went ahead and used him that way. But I want to take a look at a man. It's found in the book of Mark. Mark, the 3rd chapter, is where we're going to basically be. And this was one of the men that God actually, or Jesus actually met in his ministry. Remember last week, some of you were here last week, we talked about the man that had demons in him and how that the Lord cared enough about this guy that he went to him and he healed him and he cast the demons out, sent the man home, clothed and in his right mind. He changed this man's life. And to me, I love reading and studying and looking at the stories of real people like you and I, people who we look at ourselves as not all that great, and how the Lord loved them and how he helped them and how he healed this particular person and how he can help us as well. Let's look at the chapter 2 beginning. And I just want to start in verse 23. This is a day in the life of Jesus. It says, one Sabbath day, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. Have you ever done that? Go through a wheat field and maybe get some of it and rub it in your hand and eat a little bit of it, or corn or whatever. And that's what they were doing. And the Pharisees said to him, look, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Because supposedly on the Sabbath you could do no work, and the Pharisees had all their own laws about that. And I got to thinking, I mentioned this morning, well, what were the Pharisees doing out in the middle of a field? Isn't that kind of creepy? Aha! I saw that. What are you doing eating this? Don't you realize this is the Sabbath? And you think, where did you come from? And why are you telling me that? But that was their job in their mind, was to set everybody else straight. And they were trying to find something that they could use against Jesus to get him killed, basically. We're going to see that here in a minute. And so going on, he answered, have you never read that David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for the priest to eat. And he gave also some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. When God created the worlds, he created it in 6 days, And on the seventh day he rested, and he consecrated that as the Sabbath. And he told the people in the law of Moses, I don't want you to do any work on the seventh day. Will you stop and think about how we are? He said the Sabbath was made for the benefit of man and not man for the Sabbath. The Israelite people and us in general, if we didn't have a day off, they would have worked themselves to death. They would have worked 7 days straight. They would have never taken time off to be with family, never taken time off to be with friends. They would have just worked themselves to death. But God said, no, I want you to take time. Be still and know that I am God. It's hard for us to be still and know, isn't it? We always have something else to do. Have you ever noticed that the work is never done? There's always something else that you could be doing. But God says that's okay. I want you to take some time away, and I want you to relax and rest. And he says there'll be work tomorrow. And so that's what the Sabbath day was. Basically, not only was it a foreshadowing of the Sabbath day rest throughout eternity, which we call heaven, but it was also given to them for that time so that they would slow down, spend maybe some time in His Word, spend time with each other, and just relax and look at nature and be with God. Do we need that or not? Do we need that? You know, I think we do. But then going on, it says that, so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And of course, they didn't like that because he was basically telling them that he was God. And then in chapter 3, another time he went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. And some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. And Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, stand up in front of everyone. Then Jesus asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or do evil, to save life or to kill? But they remained silent, and he looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. And to the man he said, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Well, the story is interesting to me because of this man. Here's the man who, first of all, Jesus was criticized by the Pharisees for what his disciples did on the Sabbath. And then he told them that he was the Lord of the Sabbath, which put a mark on him for killing. It says that they looked for a reason to kill him after that. And then on to the synagogue, Jesus went to make the message plain. There he would meet a man and heal a man, a troubled man, and he would do this in spite of the consequences that it had for him. Now you put yourself in the place of this man that had this bad hand. He was there, and he went through life with this problem. And he realized he had this handicapped issue, and he probably was ashamed of himself and ashamed of that. And yet here was Jesus. He was there in the midst of these people who were looking for a reason to have him killed. And here's this man. He met this man, he healed this man, and he did it in spite of the consequences to him. You know, oftentimes I think that we do things or don't do things because we're afraid of how that's going to look at us, come back on us. Have there ever been times that you didn't do what you knew was right because you felt like somebody would not think highly of you for that or would have a reason to come back at you or whatever? Jesus says you do good anytime you see it needed, no matter what. And Jesus was like that. Jesus was always the same. He cared for people. He cared for them where they are. He had compassion on them. He loved them. And that's one of the things that these Jewish leaders saw in Jesus. They said, here's an opportunity to catch him because he's going to do work on the Sabbath day. In their minds, as warped as it was, if he heals this man, that's work. That's work. But they thought, we're probably going to do it anyway, because every time we've ever seen Jesus in this kind of a condition, he would take the person's ills away from them and deliver them from whatever it was, their handicap or the demon possession or whatever it was. Jesus was always the same. Let me say something. One of the best things that could be ever said about us is to have somebody say, whoever I'm talking to, I like to pick on Cody. He's a good sport, usually. Now that he's a principal, I'm better be careful. But to say, like, Cody's always the same. No matter where you see him, no matter where he's at, no matter who he's with, no matter what the circumstances are, that he's always the same. Wouldn't that be a good thing to say about somebody? You know, a lot of times we're not that way. If I'm with my friends, I act this way, or I talk this way. If I'm around church people, it's different. I become more holy. I become more careful of my words, etc. But Jesus was always the same, and so they knew that they could catch him in this situation. Well, here's the man. He had a withered hand. His hand was withered. He could not use it. And so I want to look at three things. First is physically. Physically, he was handicapped as a worker. There are certain jobs he could not do. He could not do a lot of the manual labor that had to be done at that time in history. He couldn't do it. And as a result of that, that caused him to be dependent on other people. Isn't it hard to depend on other people? And when you want to do something and you can't get it done yourself, it's really hard to ask somebody else, would you come and help me? Or could you help me? And again, that's a pride issue. I can do it myself, But here's this man, he couldn't work, probably not. There were probably some things, but probably not a lot. And he had to depend on other people. Have any of you ever been in a situation where, like say a surgery or something, where somebody else had to dress you or had to take care of your personal needs? That's a little humiliating. Or even, and go through life like that. Can you imagine what that would be like? So physically, this man was suffering. What his affliction must have done to him emotionally? Well, it made him feel self-conscious. He probably, wherever he was, he would probably try to keep that one hand somewhere so people wouldn't look at it and stare at him. He probably tried to keep that away from people. Why? Because that was something that made him self-conscious. And it made him feel inferior. Like we started out our sermons today. Why is it that everyone else are beautiful and I'm not? Why is it everyone else has got their act together and I don't think I am? This man probably felt, wow, everybody else has got two good hands, but not me. It made him envy maybe those with normal bodies and looking at people who could do things, but he couldn't. How did this affect him spiritually? Well, let's take a look at that. Made him look to the Lord for help. He was in the synagogue. That's where Jesus found him. He'd come to the synagogue. Probably wanted to be by himself over in the corner, though. But he was there because he needed God. And he realized his need for God because of his problems and his inability to do a lot of things for himself. It caused him to go to the synagogue to pray, and blessed is the affliction that brings us to God. Sometimes we look at our problems and we think they're a curse, and oftentimes they're actually a blessing. And Jesus wrote in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, in one place, he said, if your eye offends you, do what? Pluck it out. For it's better for you to go through life with one eye than have two eyes and be thrown into hell. He said that. Jesus wrote that. He said, if your hand offends you, cut it off. It's better for you to go through life maimed with one hand than to have two and not, basically, Jesus is saying, and not see your need for me and not make it to heaven. So, the compassion of Jesus toward this man is amazing. Note how the enemies of Jesus were watching him. We mentioned that. They're trying to get him. They had become aware of his compassion. We talked about that. They know that he will stop to heal this hurting man. Jesus was always moved by the needs of others, and he's still moved today by our needs. You might ask yourself, does he even know my name? Does he understand what I'm going through? What do you think the answer to that is? Absolutely he does. He knows you. He knows your needs. He really does. He made you just the way he did for a purpose. And so Jesus speaks. He said, stand forth. In other words, stand up. This man did not want to stand up in front of the crowd. That had to be a tough thing for him. No, he was the guy that didn't want to be looked at. Stand up, he said. Those words would bring criticism again. Those words would call for faith from this man. So this man had enough faith in what Jesus said to actually do that in front of all these people, everyone looking at him. He could have just run out the door, but he didn't. He stood up. He said, stand forth. And of course, these words would unite Christ's enemies. And then Jesus responds, it is always good to do good, no matter what time it is. Then he said something that must have just been terrible for this man to hear. He said, stretch forth your hand. Stretch forth your hand in front of all these people. He had to take it out and look, and everybody was looking at the thing that he was ashamed of, his withered hand. You know, that ugly hand, the man wanted to show him his other hand. He said, why don't you look at this one? Here, this is my good hand. You want to look at a hand, look at this good one. But no, Jesus said, no, I know all about your good hand. I want to see the other one. Stretch it out. And so he did. He stretched it out. And Jesus asked to see that, and Jesus wants to see our withered hand too. He wants to see the thing that we keep secret, the thing that we want no one to know about, that we keep to ourselves. Jesus says, no, you stretch that out. I want to see that because I can heal you. And one of the things that the devil will do in our lives, he will often try to get us to keep those things that we have that are a problem secret. And when the devil can have us, when we keep things secret in our lives, that's when the devil can defeat us. But when we bring things to the light, as painful as that might be, and let Jesus look at this thing in my life, whether it be my lust, whether it be my anger, whether it be my problems, my tongue, you fill in the blank. Jesus said, I want to see that, and I want to deal with that, and it takes faith, but Jesus will take care of that. But we want to show him the good stuff. Lord, look at all the things I do well. I'm so gifted in these things, and I am so helpful with other people, and I do all, God and Jesus, I know all about that, and that's all good, but let me see the stuff that you're trying to hide. And just as he healed this withered man's hand, he will take care of ours as well. He will make us whole. Sunday school teacher had a little boy attend her class. Little Billy was born with only one arm. It was a problem he had from birth. And Mrs. Anderson, the teacher, worried about how little Billy would be accepted by the other little kids as he was different. But she did not need to worry because pretty soon all the other kids were playing with little Billy and they were having a great time together. And so, but then she made a terrible mistake. She said, okay, we're going to play this game. We're going to play, this is the church. This is the steeple. Open the door and see all the people. And as soon as she had said that, she thought, oh no, Billy can't do that. He's only got one hand. What? And before she could even think about it, the little girl stood up, went over to Billy, put her hand with his and said, Billy, let's build the church together. Let's build the church together. So with his good hand and her other hand, they said, this is the church. This is the steeple. Open the door. See all the people. That's what we ought to realize is there's not some gifted people and then the rest of us, but there is people that God has made, and he made us the way he wants us to be. Several years ago, I read a book by Bob Russell. Some of you know who I'm talking about. And the book was entitled, When Life is a Zoo, God Still Loves You. I want to read something to you that he wrote in this book. It says this. Several years ago, and this is Bob Russell talking, I heard a man named Dave Ring speak. I was at a conference and some of the best known speakers and authors had already spoken to the assembly. I'd never heard Ring speak before, and I wondered why he was on the program until he began to speak. David Ring was born with cerebral palsy. He had such a heavy speech impediment that his listeners had to struggle to understand him. People who heard only his voice and not his words no doubt wonder why this man, so handicapped, is used to speak at conferences that feature nationally known speakers and authors. But David Ring held the audience of 12,000 people spellbound for 20 minutes as he talked about what it is like to grow up so attached to his mama and then to see her die. But he said God was good and God had sustained him through grief. Then he slurred, they said I would never ride a bike, but I did. They said I would never get married, but I did. And I got 5 kids to prove it. And of course, the audience burst out in laughter at that. Then he added, they said, I would never be able to preach. But this past year, I preached 265 times. Now I got cerebral palsy, yet I preach. He said, what's your problem? He goes on to say, I heard some of the finest preachers in the nation that week and never shed a tear. But as I sat there in the darkness of that auditorium, tears rolled down my cheeks. What God didn't do through famous authors and big-name preachers, he did for me through a man with cerebral palsy who used his struggles creatively. Paul said, God chose the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of this world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of the world and the despised things to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast about him. When you are at your lowest, weakest moment, that may be the time that God uses you to make the greatest impact on someone else. Like the eagle, when you are falling, and maybe when you are about to learn how to fly. And so, why do I love preaching about people that were ordinary people like us? Because I want you to realize how God thinks about you and about me. We don't have to be beautiful. We don't have to be educated. We don't have to be any of those things. We just have to have a heart for God and be obedient to him. And I would stress, when he says to us, show me that stuff that you have hidden, because I want to heal you. I want to cure you. I want to give you an opportunity to get out of that box that Satan has got you in so that you can live a full life for me and for my kingdom. We're going to sing, in closing, page 407. 407. I've always loved this song. And I believe it goes along with what we've said today. And it says, no one understands like Jesus. Let's stand together as we sing the first verse.